critically important screening and discussion. I'm terribly sorry that I cannot be there with you tonight, but I wanted to express my deep gratitude for your interest and dedication to engaging in this dialogue. As we all know, the experiences of the African American and Jewish communities in the struggle for equality are closely connected. More than any time in recent history, our communities must engage to ensure that these bonds flourish. Just days ago, we marked Holocaust Remembrance Day, Yom HaShoah. We did so in the shadow of violent acts of anti-Semitism at the Shabbat of Poway and Tree of Life synagogues. While these events shocked us, we know that so many others never make the national headlines, but are nevertheless pervasive across our country. Just a few days ago, the Anti-Defamation League announced that anti-Semitic attacks in the United States doubled in 2018. This must serve as a wake-up call to us all. As anti-Semitic attacks are on the rise, so too are hate crimes and violence and discrimination against the Black community. African Americans continue to face systemic discrimination in housing, education, and jobs. In our state, attempts to disenfranchise minority voters have included several illegal attempts to purge the voter rolls, misapplying our state signature matching law, and now a new proposal to require former felons to pay fines and fees before having their voting rights restored. As we consider these challenges, it is imperative that we reflect on the enormous sacrifice made by both Black and Jewish communities in support of civil rights, so that we may address hatred together. The history of cooperation between our two communities runs very deep, and we must do everything we can to ensure it continues. We are fighting the same fight as those who came before us, and history has shown again and again that when we fight together, we succeed. So let us look to the examples of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rabbi Abraham Herschel, and the sacrifices of those like Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and James Chaney, and ask what more can we do to make our country a more accepting place. I'd like to recognize the sponsors of this event, the Jewish Federation of Broward County, the Children's Services Council, 10 Days of Connection, CFM Mediation, and the NSU Art Museum Fort Lauderdale for making this evening possible. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to the distinguished panelists, School Board Member Dr. Rosalind Osgood, Vice Mayor Brian Johnson, and other leaders in our community for guiding what I'm sure will be an enlightening discussion following the screening. I wish you all the very best and look forward to continuing this discussion in the future.
For those perhaps unfamiliar with the significance of Sinai and Selma within the Black and Jewish communities, let's place this into historical context. Within the Jewish tradition, it teaches us that when the Torah was given, all Jews were standing at Sinai. Not only all those who had exited Egypt, but all Jews who would come into this world in the future were present. Revelation was so important that even Jews who did not yet exist had to witness it directly. What happened at Mount Sinai? To answer quite simply, the Jewish people, every person, had an encounter with God. At Mount Sinai, the Jewish people became a nation. The Selma to Montgomery March was part of a series of civil rights protests that occurred in 1965 in Alabama, a southern state with deeply entrenched racist policies. In March of that year, in an effort to register Black voters in the South, protesters marching the 54-mile route from Selma to the state capital of Montgomery were confronted with deadly violence from local authorities and white vigilante groups. As the world watched, the protesters, under the protection of federalized National Guard troops, finally achieved their goal, walking around the clock for 3 days. The historic march and Martin Luther King's participation raised awareness of the difficulties faced by Black voters and ultimately led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. On June 19, 1962, 15 Reform rabbis were among 37 demonstrators arrested when they sought to recite Hebrew prayers at a motel involved in a desegregation controversy in St. Augustine. They were there at the request of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The motel manager, James Brock, shoved the rabbis and abused them physically, stating, "You are not going to pray here. This is private property." For years, anti-Semitism ruled Miami's Barrier Island. Even by the 1930s, advertisements for sale of Miami Beach's oceanfront hotels boasted, "Always a view, never a Jew." It wasn't until 1947 that Miami Beach passed a law prohibiting property owners from displaying signs that used the words "restricted" or "Gentiles only." One of the most notorious lynchings in the United States took place in Davie in 1935. Ruby Stacy, 37, a black laborer, was accused of assaulting a 30-year-old white woman. Just this year, earlier in January, I bore witness to a soil collection ceremony at Woodlawn Cemetery as part of the Equal Justice Initiative's effort to create greater awareness and understanding about racial terror lynchings. Mr. Stacy's name has now been etched on one of the 800 red steel columns at the Montgomery, Alabama Memorial. As we reflect upon this legacy and our individual and collective responsibility, I'd like to share just briefly why I'm here and this matters to me. You just saw the film that was created and produced by Stephen Fischler. A couple of years ago when I was living in Jacksonville, Florida, I had spoken with some of the rabbis and I was curious. I just moved to the city in 2012 and I inquired, "Can you share with me what's the relationship between blacks and Jews here?" And they said, "You know, Shabara, we don't have a bad relationship, we have no relationship." And so I created this From Ties That Bind, from swastika to Jim Crow, and I reached out to Stephen Fischler because I knew about the documentary through the book. He honors Gabrielle Edgecombe, and so I reached out to him online. I didn't know him, and I told him why I was personally interested. Behind me is my mother at the top, Suzanne Jackson, and she's here this evening. Would you raise your hand, Mama? She's on the second row, right there. When she was 23, she was the lead organizer for the 100,000-person march on the Pentagon in opposition of the Vietnam War. And on the side of her is my father, standing with Dr. King. My father was the first to call for a march from Selma to Montgomery, and at one point, while my mom was doing that work up in DC, my father was the national director for the spring mobilization to end the war in Vietnam, and so their paths collided around social justice activism and social justice work. So I reached out to Stephen Fischler and I told him that, and then in case it wasn't enough, because I wrote it in an email, I said to him, "Oh yeah, and by the way, Gabrielle Edgecombe, who I know you deeply respect because you created a film based on her book, she was with my mother the day that I was born at Freedman's Hospital in DC, and Stephen called me the next day, and the rest is kind of history." What I'd like to do now is I'd like to bring up our panelists. I'm going to ask just a couple of questions, but what I'm really mostly interested is the thoughts and ideas that are here in this room. Is it possible to bring the lights up just a little bit so the panelists will be able to see the audience? Thank you. I'm really interested in your thoughts and ideas. We are living in tumultuous times. We are living in tumultuous times, and I don't think we can hide from that. So I'm interested in the ideas that you have. How are we going to move this community forward together? I'd like to first bring up Brian C. Johnson, presently Vice Mayor of the City of West Park, Florida, and President and CEO at the Minority Builders Coalition, which supports a network of nearly, you can clap, 300 minority and small businesses throughout South Florida, creating and retaining jobs for nearly 600 workers. If you'll take the first seat here, Mr. Johnson. Thank you, Vice Mayor. He previously spent 17 years in various leadership positions with a local human services organization where he designed, secured funding, and operated more than 25 different types of programs to help troubled children and families throughout Florida. With the encouragement and support from local community leaders, Vice Mayor Johnson founded Community-Based Connections in 2009. It's a provider member of the Florida Network of Youth and Family Services, providing non-residential juvenile delinquency prevention services to CINS, FINS eligible teenagers in Broward. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Next, I'd like to bring to the stage Lindsay Glantz. Lindsay attended Washington University in St. Louis and received a Bachelor in Science and Business Administration with a double major in Marketing and Entrepreneurship. She was president of her business fraternity and received a graduation award chosen by her peers for leadership and scholastic achievement. Lindy attended the Shepherd Broad College of Law at Nova Southeastern University on a full academic scholarship, graduated magna cum laude, and served as marketing editor for the Nova Law Review. As a community-minded leader, Lindsay employs her skills by serving as secretary of the board of directors for the Jewish Federation of Broward County. She has been a member of the Jewish Federation of Broward County's Youth Leadership Division Board since 2011 and served as its chair for 3 years. Lindsay is currently a member of National Non-Leadership Cabinet. Dr. Rosalind Osgood has over 21 years of experience in nonprofit management. She has served as the CEO of the Mount Olive Development Corporation for the past 16 years. She is a former adjunct professor at Nova Southeastern University, where she taught leadership and public policy evaluation in the Master of Public Administration program. Dr. Osgood was ordained as the first female preacher in the history of the New Mount Olive Baptist Church, and we can clap for that. And is currently serving as an elected official on the Broward County School Board representing District 5. Dr. Osgood is the author of 2 academic articles and a book titled The Story Behind the Story. In 2013, Dr. Osgood became the first female chaplain for the City of Fort Lauderdale Police Department. She has received numerous awards, including the 2009 J.M. Family's African American Achievers Award for Community Service. Thank you, Dr. Osgood, for joining us. Robert Bobby Flam was the owner and operator of Jumbo's Restaurant from 1967 to 2014 and was one of the first people to integrate a restaurant in South Florida. As a businessman in Miami, he was active in the community and a leader in breaking down racial barriers. Bobby's family moved from outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Miami Beach in 1959 and opened Jumbo's Restaurant in Liberty City shortly thereafter. After graduating from Miami Beach High School and the University of Illinois, Bobby returned to Miami and took over Jumbo's from his father. At that time, Jumbo's and all of the restaurants in Miami were segregated. Bobby opened the front doors of Jumbo's to Black customers and soon after integrated his staff. In 2005, Jumbo's was honored in the United States Congressional Record and its golden anniversary and recognized as a national and international civil rights landmark that helped end segregation while ushering in a new age of race relations in Miami. In 2008, the restaurant was honored by the James Beard Foundation in the category of American Classics for its historical significance and, more importantly, its famous fried chicken and fried shrimp. And finally, I'd like to bring Denise Littau. Ms. Littau joined Secured Futures in January 2018. She graduated with a BA in Political Science from Pacific Lutheran University and subsequently a Juris Doctorate from Seattle University. After graduation, she worked as a research assistant at the Institute of International Law in Kiel, Germany, and later, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, she worked as a senior lecturer at Humboldt University in Berlin. Upon her return to the United States, she practiced law before entering the banking industry. Her banking career has been entirely focused on servicing the disabled and/or elderly. She worked for an 8-year stint at SunTrust Bank as a trust advisor in the Special Needs Trust Department, followed by nearly 5 years at Wells Fargo as a senior advisory specialist in the area of life management services. She is a board member of both the Jewish Federation and Jewish Foundation of Broward County. Denise has been serving as the co-chair for the Social Services Impact Team for the Jewish Federation. She currently serves as the Child Care Chair, a program providing care management for legacy donors of the Jewish Foundation. She is also a Lion of Judah as well as a trustee of the Jewish Women's Federation in Broward County and founder of the Hearts of Gold Society, a women's circle to support the goals of Ann Stork Center. Let's give a round of applause for all our if you have a question, please raise your hand. We do have a mic runner who will come to you, and if you will make sure it's a question, and I know that you've got some extraordinary ideas that you want to share with us, but we need succinct questions because we are on a time limit this evening. What I'd first like to do is actually invite you all, if you could, just give one word about your thoughts about the documentary that we just saw. Just one word.
Emotional.
Emotional. Thank you for that.
I would say educational.
Educational. Thank you for that.
I would say inspirational.
Inspirational. Thank you.
Moving.
Moving. Thank you.
Hopeful.
Hopeful. Thank you. Does that pretty much sum up what you're feeling out in the audience right now? Yeah. Thank you for that. So, Bobby, I'd like to start with you, actually. Very curious. In 1967, when you made that decision, very curious about the lived experience that you had had and what made you take such a bold move, and also how easy or difficult was it to get other restaurateurs and business owners on board with your ideas of racial equity and racial justice?
Since a young man, I was very familiar with racism and bigotry. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania as a young boy, and we were the only Jewish family. We were about 20 miles north of Pittsburgh in the country. So I had an experience as a youngster dealing with people that weren't familiar with being around Jewish people. And truthfully, they were ignorant, those people. And at the time, the anti-Semitism really wasn't brought up a lot, but those people were anti-Semitic. As I came to Miami Beach that was when I was 10 years old. Miami Beach at the time was segregated, and Miami was definitely segregated. And the Jews were in Miami Beach were a wonderful population, a big population. However, there was a lot of places that were anti-Semitic. No Jews allowed. Many of the hotels wouldn't allow Jews, and many of the restaurants wouldn't allow Jews. Where my restaurant was a lower income area, mostly industrial, and the neighborhood was changing. It was the white people and the white families were moving out, and the people that I served loved my food. And I inherited a restaurant that was segregated, even though the civil rights law had passed. And the African American people that came to my restaurant would come and take food, takeout food in the back. There was a back room there. And I was uncomfortable with this because I had spent time in Gainesville, Florida, my first year of college, very segregated, very bigoted. Then I went to the University of Illinois, which was a lot less segregated. It wasn't segregated at all. It was integrated, and it was much more liberal. So when I came back to Miami, I was very uncomfortable with the thought of black people, African American, Negro people having to eat my food that I serve in a back room. So I wanted to open up the dining room to the black customer, and I thought it was the right thing to do, and I did it.
Denise, would like to talk to you, again, a very personal subject about you and your son, and very interested how you began discussing race and ethnicity with Max, and if you talk a bit for you about the intersection. Kimberly Crenshaw talks about intersectionality, so when we think about the intersection of those identities that can be oppressive for us. So, for example, if you were a black woman who was also differently abled and perhaps a lesbian, you would experience a very different level of oppression here in the United States and across the world. So very curious for you about the intersection of faith and race, and then if you would just share a bit about your son and your personal journey.
With regard to my son, I'm going to have to say that I've done this on a case-by-case basis. And the reason for that is that I did not want him to ever feel limited by the color of his skin or his religion. And I know that when I was growing up, my parents, of course, were very conscious of, their life and their upbringing, which was partially in the South, which was very different from my upbringing, which was basically in Seattle, Washington, mostly in the 70s and 80s. So what I didn't want him to feel limited, but I did want him to be realistic about that there will be people that don't like you because of the color of your skin or because of your religion. And this is something that you're going to have to essentially live with throughout your lifetime, as I have. So that's kind of the way that I have handled that topic. For me personally, my journey started much later in life. I was about 15 before my mother actually revealed that her biological father was German Jewish. And I actually then ended up working and living in Germany for over a decade and had plenty of time to explore this history and to come to terms with it and to basically own it and to very proudly pass it on to my child. So that's the way that I've always looked at my life. And I have a very rich and a very beautiful history. Thank you for that. Thank you so much.
So Lindsay, I'd like to come down to you, and I'd like you to share with the audience your experiences traveling as part of the National Young Leadership Cabinet Civil Rights Mission, and how that has shaped and impacted and informed the way you now walk through the world.
Of course. So for those of you who don't know what National Young Leadership Cabinet is, it's a national leadership development program for young Jewish philanthropists in their 30s and 40s, and it's all across the top Jewish philanthropists in North America. So as part of our curriculum this year, we actually went on a civil rights mission to Alabama. We went to Birmingham, Selma, and Montgomery. So a lot of things that we heard about in the film, we were at the forefront of. We were at the bridge where the massacre of Bloody Sunday happened. We walked across the bridge in solidarity. We met with pastors, we went to churches, and we also went to the local Jewish synagogue in Birmingham where there was they put 54 dynamite sticks there, so we got to talk about that. That was almost a catastrophic event. And for me, when I first went on the mission, to be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect, but it was an incredibly eye-opening experience. And the only way I can really explain it is I am a graduate of David Posnack, which is a local Jewish private school in this community. And every year as part of our curriculum, what we would do is we would speak to Holocaust survivors, and they always encourage us to have these conversations because at some point, the survivors wouldn't be here. And this is what I really felt that we were doing on this mission, because the pastors we spoke with and the people that were there, some of these people were the last to experience and be with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I really felt privileged and honored to be there and be part of the conversation, and it definitely has changed my outlook, and I am extremely grateful to be part of the Cabinet and Jewish Federation.
Thank you for that. It's interesting. I just returned from Montgomery. I spent 3 days there with the CEO of St. Jude, Alsac, and his 35-person executive team. They wanted to deeply explore the civil rights movement and think about it in the context of diversity and inclusion, and the moral imperative, but also the business case. And one of the men that we had an opportunity to talk with is the state senator, Hank Sanders, who was the first black state senator since Reconstruction. He's Harvard educated and just stepped down after 35 years in the Senate this past fall. And many of them said that he's 78, and he took a chair. He said, when you're 78, these bones need to have a rest. And one of the team members remarked on that. If I come back in the next couple of years, he may not be here. So I think it's really beautiful when we think about the connection. Right now, we've got 4 or 5 generations in the workplace, and if we're not making those connections, making sure that we are carrying on that legacy and sharing that history, it absolutely can be lost. And talking about, Dr. Osgood, how we make the connection between varied generations, the current political climate has seen a rise in the number of anti-Semitic and anti-Black rhetoric and hate-induced attacks. And unfortunately, across our nation, students have been confronted with swastikas drawn on school books, posting of photos on social media comparing Black people to gorillas, walls spray-painted with hate-filled graffiti, and racist and anti-Semitic slurs and comments. And And as a matter of fact, in 2017, the Anti-Defamation League reported that K through 12 schools surpassed any public area as the location with the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents. How can South Florida, our community, overcome obstacles by optimizing opportunities and obtaining outstanding outcomes despite this current rash of discrimination facing both the African American and the Jewish communities? And then if you could share with us more specifically what the Broward County School District is doing to combat some of this recent hate and rhetoric that we see bubbling to the surface.
So I'll take the last part of the question first. So in the Broward County School District, we have Holocaust teaching all throughout the year. We have African American history in a lot of our schools. We are very diverse because of the population of young people that we serve. We have a very strong diversity committee. We make sure that we celebrate all the heritage days of all of the religions, the cultures. We really try to embrace it. And around 2013, we began to do something really bold. We began to have courageous conversations where we began to engage staff around the whole courageous conversation. And then we had an incident in the city of Fort Lauderdale where the law enforcement officers said all these racist things about then President Barack Obama, so we collaborated with them to get them involved. So right now we've had about 800 staff persons, teachers, administrators trained in courageous conversation. We actually have 3 board members going through the courageous conversation class right now ourselves. I believe that if our children are going to have a perspective of unity and inclusivity, it starts with us. I believe very strongly that our kids learn these things. I grew up in a home being raised by grandparents. My grandmother's father was a child that got from the slave owner having sex with the slave. His white brothers and sisters went to school, but he had to work in the field. My grandmother's mother was part white and part Indian. So she came from a very distinct background where she suffered a lot of discrimination by both black and white, and then being Christian on top of that, and female. So she always raised me to just love people. I can remember going to Fort Lauderdale High School at a time when it was 80% white. So my friends in school were white friends, and then I came home to my cis-trunk neighborhood with my black friends. I remember seeing Roots for the first time on TV and being very disturbed by it, and going to school and having my best friend Lauren, who was white, being jumped by some black kids because she was white. And of course I had to participate and protect her, and I ended up getting suspended from school for violence and fighting those boys. And it was not until Lauren's dad, who was a white man, came to school and explained why I was fighting those boys for fighting Lauren, that I was allowed to stay in school. And I genuinely believe that we teach bigotry and hatred to our children. Our children do what they hear us do. They say what they hear us say. So while we're doing everything we can in school to further teach them unity, because if you go to a playground, I have a 4-year-old granddaughter right now, and she's in a very diverse school. She's not concerned with whether somebody's white or whether they're Jewish. They all play, they celebrate their birthdays, they have a good time. It is adults that show the hatred. It is adults that teach our kids that somebody is superior, that somebody is better than them. And then they begin to act out in these different types of behavior, and we punish them for it. So we're working very aggressively within our schools to have kids come together. I think February 14, 2018, which changed all of our lives. It was one of the most horrific things that could ever happen in Broward County. But through that, you saw children working together across racial lines. You saw black children and white children coming together, Jews and Christians and Muslim children. But what was very interesting to me, being the only black school board member, is I saw white kids from MSD go to Chicago and Baltimore to talk to black students or black kids that was dealing with gun violence on the street every day, but they were not talking to the 300 black children that were right there at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. So it's those kinds of opportunities that we have to take every opportunity to get around the table and talk. I thought as I was coming here, I was very excited about it, but I don't think we can really be serious about talking about hatred and bigotry until we get the white supremacists and those that are promulgating this behavior to the table when they're not incognito. Some of them might be here tonight, but we don't know who they are. So their voice is missing from this conversation. So when we get serious, we'll start having everybody at the table out of the, where they're not hiding, and we can openly talk about this hatred and these feelings, because I think ultimately we'll realize that we all want the same for ourselves and for our children. But that one piece is always missing. Nobody's going to say, hey, I'm the bigot. I'm the white supremacist. They're going to come and be incognito. If I had a buzzer to detect tonight, I'm sure I would find a few. But they're not included in the conversation to be a part of the discussion.
Let me acknowledge the power of that truth. It's interesting. There's some recent data and research that shows that millennials are not less racist than their baby boomer grandparents. And as a matter of fact, the study had one question, one of the questions in the study asked whether or not they were talking about black people to white young people, whether they thought this black person in an image was lazy or hardworking. And all of them, most of them, many of them, 85, 90% said lazy. And that goes back to what you were talking about, and this whole notion, and I think it's an interesting one to explore, around evolution, right? How do we evolve? And if someone does want to evolve, if they want to come out of if they want to come out of black racism, if they want to come out of anti-Semitic, rhetoric or behavior, are we also creating space for that? There's a recent book, Rising Out of Hatred. Has anyone read it? Just won a Pulitzer. It's the story of Derek Black. Derek Black is the grandson of David Duke. How many people know who David Duke is? Okay, we know David Duke. He's also the son of the founder of Stormfront. Stormfront is the most racist website in the world. When this young man, Derek Black, was 10 years old, he was coding and creating racist content for Stormfront. As a 10-year-old, he was homeschooled because by all accounts, he's brilliant. Academically, he's gifted. They put him in a community college, and the connection to us here in South Florida, he then, as a 21-year-old, enrolled in a college in South Florida that's one of the most liberal college campuses in the country. Many of the students are atheists. There's an Orthodox Jewish community on the campus. So he enrolls in this school, and by day he's a college student, and about 3 or 4 o'clock every day he sneaks away to a corner of campus because he's on a microphone co-hosting a racist radio show with his father. And he's so distraught about this dual kind of life he's living because he falls in love with a young Jewish woman on campus. One of his best friends is Peruvian, and then the Orthodox Jewish student, they're kind of kicking it and hanging out every day. So he's really grappling with everything he's been taught and all of this vitriol that he's been espousing since he was a child. So he decides he wants to out himself. He has a very distinct look. He has long red hair. He wears a black hat, the kind of hat that you use when you're herding cattle. And this is South Florida, so I don't know if there are many cattle herders in the room. But he has this distinct look. So he's featured in this magazine, and he places this magazine in a very public place because he wants to out himself, because it's just the shame and the pain and the stress of living this dual life is just overwhelming. Well, 3 months go by and nobody reads it. So he goes away to Germany for a broad program, and someone's working on a dissertation, and they happen to be exploring the Stormfront website, and they see him. There's an informal kind of forum on campus. It's an intranet. And so instead of going to Derek Black, this graduate student posted, and it just, everything breaks loose. Now the campus can't kick him off because why? Freedom of speech, right? He's not safe on campus, and everyone decides that they're going to walk away from him. The young Jewish woman, she's mortified. She's disgusted when she goes onto the website and reads all the things that he's been saying about Jewish people. Many of the other students who had befriended him, they drop him. And the Orthodox Jewish student says, you know what, I'm going to invite him to Shabbat. He's been hosting the Shabbat on campus with a group of students, and they say, we're not coming. And when Derek comes to the Shabbat, the student doesn't confront him about anything he said. He decides, you know what, I think he'll change if he gets to know who I am. If somehow we make this human connection. Long story short, he does. He denounces all of his hatred, bigoted ways, moves across the country, changes his name. You can imagine the challenge of that because the Ku Klux Klan didn't let him go that easily. They're very angry. His friends on campus are still grappling with who is this person. When they first approach him to do the story, the Washington Post journalist, Derek Black says, I'm not interested. I've moved away. I'm trying to reclaim my life. I'm someone else. And then about a year later, he changes his mind, and he changes his mind because of today's political climate. He says, you know, although I'm not espousing this hatred and this bigotry and this racism, I created this world. This is my fault. And so I think that's exactly what you're talking about. How do we take individual responsibility? When are we going to be accountable? And how do we hold space for those people that want to be redeemed and want some type of reconciliation? So thank you so much for that. So Vice Mayor Johnson, very curious, in your time in office, and you and I talked a little bit before, so I know the perspective that you come from, but I'd love for you to share that with our audience. Can you talk to us about what you've seen, these similarities and differences, and what brings you hope today in the work that you're doing within your municipality, but then also as a Black man in America, and that lived experience and how it shaped how you are thinking about what we do in this community?
So, good evening, everyone. Thank you all again to the Jewish Federation of Broward County Children's Services Council, Evan Goldman and Shavar, as well as all the panelists for being here. I do want to file a couple of disclaimers before I answer the question. First of all, if you came here expecting an ethnic pep rally, meaning that the Black people will come and say we love being Black, and the Jewish people will come and say we love being Jewish, and everybody just leaves here feeling good about themselves and do nothing. None of the hard work to come together. This is the wrong place for you. Second disclaimer, I accepted the invitation to be here, knowing full well that I'm an elected official, who happens to also be in the campaign, and my sister, Dr. Osgood, did the same thing. And I recognize the fact that in this courageous conversations, there may be some imperfect perspectives. You know, my worldview as a human being continues to expand, and my understanding of other people's worldview continues to expand. But I just want to warn anybody who may be here thinking that at some point you want to use whatever words I say up here against me in the court of public opinion. Listen, this is very important work. And if we do this right, we will leave here having Black people and Jewish people recognize that your enemy is my enemy, and we will fight it together. And if we do this right, we will leave here having Black people and Jewish people accepting the fact that the inalienable rights that America promised, the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, can be enjoyed by you and me. And I would do anything I can to help you pursue yours, and I would expect you and hope that you would do the same thing for me. And we will leave here a powerful union if we do this right. So if I say something crazy that offends anybody, I apologize in advance. But if there's anybody who intends to skew the words that I speak and use those against me, your political petty is not nearly as important as a powerful union that we're trying to form. So I'm willing to take that risk. Black people, if you all can remember back when you were kids, and let's say you would tell your parents there's a boogeyman. You see a boogeyman in your room, and your mother or your father, well, child, go to sleep. You must be imagining something. And the child may have been imagining seeing something that wasn't there, or may have even seen the shadow of something that was there but wasn't what he or she thought. But the child kept saying, Mama, there's something in my room. There's a boogeyman in my room. Black people have been seeing the boogeyman of white supremacy, of institutional racism, of domestic terrorism for a long, long time. We didn't have to see the images of these men walking around in white t-shirts and khaki pants and tiki torches for us to be alarmed. We've been saying to the society, look, the boogeymen are here all along. When Black people have to do twice as much to earn half as much, we see the boogeyman in hiring and contracting. When Black people are subject to laws like stand your ground and now putting guns in the hands of teachers. We see the boogeymen in politics. And the good thing is that we have amongst us friends in our community who know the same boogeyman. They've seen them too. And so while mama may say go to sleep, our Jewish friends say, I'm wide awake with you. I know that boogeyman too. And as I close, I told her give me a time frame because I'm going to take a long time. But I'm 45 years old, y'all. I'm halfway to 50. I'm probably in the third, maybe fourth quarter of my life. I'm not going to waste any of my time on anything that doesn't help push my people along. And I would much rather spend that time on a consistent, reliable ally who know I have an enemy than for me to be wasting any time on anybody who I have to convince that my enemy exists.
Thank you. So we have time for just a couple of questions. So before I just want to make maybe even another 5 minutes longer, if that's okay, Corey. Okay. So if you would raise your hand, we have a mic runner. Evan is our mic runner. So we'd like to open it up and have you pose questions to our panelists. I know there's some questions in this brilliant room. Yes. Thank you. And if you would just stand, please, so we can see you. If you're able to stand, thank you.
Hi, Evan Ross. One of the things that I thought was interesting about this film is it provided the perspective about how the Black community in this country took in Jewish refugees. And it's a perspective that I don't think a lot of people know. When I talk about the history of the Black community in America and Jews working together, one of the stories I often go back to is the story of James P. Schwerner and Goodman in Philadelphia, Mississippi, who lost their lives fighting for Black people's right to register to vote. Today we have, and I think Brian really hit on a great point, which is that we have the same common enemies. People that want to promote bigotry are our common enemies. And right now we have some really loud voices on both sides of the political divide, on the extremes, that are common enemies, that are trying to drive a wedge in particular between the Black community and the Jewish community. So I'd like to hear from the people on that stage, where do you see the opportunity to take those voices that are very loud, but not representative of the majority, quite frankly, on either side of the aisle? Where do you see the opportunity to push those voices to the side and do more things like this to bring the Black community and the Jewish community together around our common values, our common goals, and our shared experiences?
Thank you for that. And we could just have two panelists respond to that, please.
Well, as a school board member, I think that we have to do it for the sake of our children. I think we owe it to our children. And I think that we have a great opportunity with social media to speak and to do it, to have messages that promote unity, messages that promote equality, messages that we support each other with commonalities. And many of you know I've been in this fight for the last couple of weeks about the African-American kid, DeLuca Roll, that was beat down and abused by two white BSO officers while a third one had his foot on the neck of another Black kid that they were arrested. If it was a white kid or Jewish kid, I would be just as outraged, I would be just as vocal about it, but I shouldn't be just out there with a bunch of Black people fighting that fight and taking that position. We have to join together on these type of things. I'm on the school board with Lori Levison, who is Jew. Her mom, Nan Rich, has been my mentor for years. She's Jew. Me and Lori are real sister girls. And you know, if you're an African American, you know what that means. We tight, we like this. And we talk openly about the different things, about, you know, how the hatred and the bigotry is coming, the things we have to deal with the children in the school. But we've committed to being an example as an African American woman and a Jewish woman, that we are friends, that we can get along, that we can bear each other's burdens, that we can genuinely love each other. So I think we all can, as the kids say, level up, starting with ourselves, to be more intentional about helping and supporting each other, using our social media to stand up together and to speak out against things that are wrong. When people that we're around, you know, make comments and they say things, a lot of times we don't challenge people. There's a very professional way that we can do that, a very non-violent way we can do that. And sometimes we need to be outraged about it. with this situation with the kids. I'm a praying person, but I am outraged about what happened to that kid, and all of us should be. So I think opportunities like that, we have to be intentional about standing together. My church hosted its first interfaith prayer visual a couple of months ago. It was huge for an African American Baptist church to host an interfaith prayer visual. But we're trying to work on these relationships and coming together as a community. And as a black person who's been discriminated against and mishandled, I can't then turn around and be guilty of what I'm accusing others of being. So I think we have a lot of opportunities to join together and work together to overshadow and be just as loud as those voices, but have facts and not promote the fake news that they promote.
I'm going to ask you if you can limit your response to 45 seconds, please.
No, then I can't.
You can't respond. You can't do that. At least he knows his limitations. Bonnie, would you like to respond to that? Yes? Okay. Another question, and if we could keep our questions short and make them very direct, please. Thank you.
Yes, Broward County seems to be ground zero for people who believe in voting, people who believe in equal rights, people who believe in felons having paid their debt to society to vote. How do we in Broward County get people to vote when it comes to statewide elections and presidential elections to make sure that those ideals that we are all here today espousing get implemented at the ballot box? It seems like Broward County doesn't do a great job of getting the maximum number of votes out that we need to get in the state.
Thank you for that. Vice Mayor, would you like to respond to that?
So the beauty of sometimes when I have these discussions, I get to preach what I've already practiced. And there was, in preparing for this, and actually having my first conversation with Evan when I accepted this invitation, he reminded me of this great story, probably one of the greatest incidents of working together across racial and ethnic lines that most of y'all have never heard of. And the backdrop of it was that there was a 1-year anniversary of a very shocking televised incident of racism. And in that 1-year anniversary, there was also a political season, to this gentleman's point, where a candidate had been outed as having some very strong divisive language online. We have here in Broward County an incident where the NAACP, the Jewish Federation of Broward, the Broward County Black elected officials, engaged for the Muslim community, SunServe for the LGBTQ community, and several of our local Hispanic advocates all got together and signed a statement condemning racism and agreeing to protect racism from getting to the mainstream of Broward County politics. That great story happened last year, y'all. And you all don't know anything about it because the press release was not released by the letter itself and the press release announcing that letter was never published by the local media. But it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. All those organizations come together to condemn hate. And if we can stand up and protect our local democracy from it, we can be a beacon of hope for everybody else.
Thank you for that. We'll take 2 more questions.
I just want to say thank you for all the panelists who was here. And I think it was something that I was speaking to the Vice Mayor about this. When it comes to actually the action, I do believe that you're right. If we come here together and actually don't do anything about it, what are we doing? So my question to the panelists is, I was speaking to somebody, all of us up here have different cultures and background, but how many of us have had the opportunity to have dinner at somebody else with different culture and background? So as far as it's great to come out here out in the community, but to invite somebody at home or to have that very intimate interaction, because this right here is fantastic, but having that intimate interaction is very important in developing that relationship as far as being able to transcend not just from today, but also generations. So I just want to see what's your response to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to take that question? Yeah, invite us to your restaurant. I like that. Yeah, for that award-winning fried shrimp.
I probably have had more relationships with the African American people than most people in this room. I had almost 60 years worth of interaction. And I can tell you that when I first integrated my restaurant, the blacks were very uncomfortable coming into the dining room and sitting next to the white customer. Very uncomfortable. And it took me just a few months to get them to come in after I hired black employees. And when I hired these black employees, there were several of my white employees that just refused to work with them. And they threatened me using the N-word, etc. And I stood up to them and I said, this is the way it's going to be, and you're free to leave. And almost 30 white employees left. But to get the white customer and the black customer to sit together just didn't happen in a month or two. It took years. And many of the people at my age and my father's age and my grandparents' age, they just could not adapt. They were so uncomfortable. And this is going back to the 60s. They were so uncomfortable with the idea that they were going to sit and eat next to a black person. And probably a big majority of my white clientele stopped coming to the restaurant altogether. And I adapted because I knew that the black customer loved my food, and I was open 24 hours a day, so I adapted. And I had black customers coming at night and white customers coming during the day, even after I was integrated. It was like, all right, here are these white customers around 7 o'clock at night, and I had a pretty good crowd, and they stopped coming. At 7:30, it starts to get dark. All of a sudden, the white customer left, and about 8 or 8:30, then the black customer started coming as I was open all night. And it's been going on for years. We're up to present day. I still have lunch with several of my old black employees. And I can tell you that even today, unfortunately, a lot of the people I have lunch with aren't real comfortable sitting with some of these black people that I've worked with for years. And it's a shame, but in the future, we need our people, our children's age and my grandchildren's age, to be open-minded about race relations. And it's up to them to make bigotry evil, racism evil, divisiveness evil, and it's up to them to take the baton and make good things happen.
Thank you for that. You know, as I could do just for a second, we have a little more time, so close your eyes just for a second. I mean, I think on this note, I'd like to try a little experiment. Close your eyes just for a moment and think of your top 5, the top 5 people in your circle. I need you to see them. Don't say their names aloud, but just think about your close circle, as what Dr. Osgood said, kind of your ace, your girl, your guy. And think about those 5 people. They would be your trusted 5, not family members, people that you go to, whether that's in your place of work, that could be your place of faith, but I need you to see those 5 people. Now, silently, don't share this aloud, I need you to think about those, you've got those 5 people? Yes? Okay. Now, think about their race. Don't say a word. Those 5 people. Think about their ability. Are they differently abled? Are they disabled? Are they able? Think about those 5 people, their age. What are their ages? What are those 5 people's sexual orientation? What about their educational level, their status? Now open your eyes. What does that circle look like? Circle look like you? A lot of heads now, right? So when we think about that expansion, that evolution, it begins with us, right? We can't have an expanded worldview around diversity and inclusion in the world of work or in our places of faith if we're not starting where we are. That's not an indictment and there's no judgment around it. I just wanted to bring it to your awareness that to the young man who posed the question, part of that is you taking a step outside and you create that change. You invite someone in. And don't let the onus always be on the person that's being othered. We'll have time for a few more questions. Raise your hands. I know we have one up front. Evan? Oh, I'm sorry. We have one more. Yes, you want to respond to that? Thank you.
One of the things that we promised Representative Hastings on a conference call that we had before tonight was that this was the beginning of a conversation and definitely not the end, because he did not want to be involved in this if it wasn't going to continue. So I think our hope is that we're starting a dialogue and that this dialogue is going to continue, and we will continue to meet and we will continue to figure out how we're going to get more people to the polls or whatever it is that we think that is going to make our community a better community in which to live. So I look at this evening as the start of something big as opposed to, we're just getting together and then we're going to go home and life is good and it's all over. No, this is really the beginning.
Thank you for that. Yes, Evan, we have a question about
My name is Betsy Bloom, and I'm a retired educator from New Jersey, where I lived and worked for over 40 years in schools that had de facto segregation, and then they were supposed to desegregate and create magnet schools in order to get people to go to school together. My issue, because I've been listening to these kinds of panels for over 50 years, and it's very frustrating when you're at my age and we're still talking the same talk. My big epiphany is that it's our mindset. As soon as we apply for a job or apply to school, we're asked to categorize ourselves into what are we. I think that if we just think of ourselves as human beings and we're prepared to do the job or to go to the school, it doesn't matter which box you check off. And I think it's that thinking to identify yourself as what you are. I did identify myself. I'm Betsy Bloom. You need to know more, you have to spend more time with me. But don't ask me, what am I? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Would someone like to respond to that?
Okay, real quickly. To your point, ma'am, we have to be committed to authentic relationships. You will find that, and as I heard everybody's bio correctly, each of us have personal, real relationships with folk outside of our native culture. And in each of these cases, pursuant to this conversation, I, as a black man, have Jewish friends. In fact, one of them who happens to be here is kind of every bit as gangster as I'm used to growing up in the hood, raised in ghetto. That's right, Evan. I had a situation where somebody tried to call me anti-Semitic because they misunderstood a statement I made online, or I made in a meeting. And before I even got home to see it, my phone started buzzing because he had already started challenging them on their mischaracterization of me, and I never had to reply. And so we all could recognize that both pandering, faking like we like each other, and prejudice, disliking each other, don't even know each other, are both imposters that we should both treat just the same. And turn around and make sure that we're genuinely interested in each other's well-being and form personal friendships. I think this will progress naturally.
Thank you for that. I would like to just add one thing, and I hear you, and thank you so much and everyone for sharing your truth. I do think we have to be mindful that when we are in this space of color blindness, there's a wonderful TED Talk, let's not be colorblind, let's be color brave, that sometimes then what we miss are the lived experiences that are so central to the core of people who do identify with groups, who have, whether they've suffered extreme oppression or extreme joy, And so I think it's critically important. And so again, when I think about like the intersection of our identities, I identify, although I do have a white Jewish mother, I identify very strongly as a black woman. That is my identity. And I need you to know that about me, because what it means is I've had a very explicit and certain set of lived experiences in America that if you don't understand that about me, then you will miss out on the relationship that we could have, because those experiences mean something and they inform the way that I live. So yes, I agree that we need to see the humanity in each other, but I also believe we need to recognize and honor the lived experiences that we have that do come from this individual identity and perspective. I know we've had a hand right down front.
Good evening, I'm Ramona LaRoche, and for me this evening, watching the film, what really stood out for me was when Biggers and Lowenfield are, exchanging their dialogue around creativity. Lowenfield did a lot of work around art therapy and using art to heal oneself. And this evening when Shavara started, she asked us to breathe and kind of, because it was so heavy. I'm a Charleston Gullah Geechee woman. I've just been here since August. But on Saturday in Charleston, we buried 36 African skeletons. We buried them. And they had been buried under the Gilliard Auditorium from 1700 to 1850. That was a major piece for Charleston, South Carolina. There were people from all over the world, races, religions, and so forth. So I say that to say that, yes, our conversations are important, but our healing is important. We carry so much pain from our lived experiences. And I'm not just talking about black people, I'm talking about everybody. We all have things that we have to address within ourselves and our communities. And when we do these things around going to the soil retention ceremony, which is where I met Shavara, to honor the legacy of Reuben Stacy, or wherever it may be, or if we go to Coral Springs and we go to the Temple of Time, where the artist has built a wooden structure dedicated to those lives lost in Parkland. Those are all part of this process. So it's going to take eating together and conversations and creating together and coming to the African American Research Library where you can find me and doing genealogy and doing all sorts of things to heal ourselves. So I come back now to the panel and ask, are any of you involved with any healing creative processes? I'm curious. I want to know how you're addressing the creativity of the art in terms of our healing as community members here in Florida.
Thank you, Dr. LaRoche, for that question.
Well, I'm a clergy person, and I believe that, God, or however you define it, it's all about justice and love and healing and kindness. And I think that within ourselves, we have to come to the place where we find it ourselves. I'm also a person that 30 years ago, I lived homeless on the streets with addiction. And through that process, I was blessed to find Alcoholics Anonymous, which gave me the 12 steps that taught me how to take a personal inventory of myself and go through this process of healing. And from that, with my other lived experiences and formal training, I've been able to develop some other mantras that help me deal with those things. Like one thing I do is every year for 2 weeks, I go to a whole different country. In a couple of weeks, it'll be South Africa. I've gone to Jerusalem, but I intentionally go places to learn about other people's backgrounds and lived experiences so that I can value and appreciate them, and so that I'm able to be effective in helping them heal and have freedom. Because you're right, pain is a part of all of our lived experience in some form or another. And how we move forward in dealing with that pain is going to either make and break our future. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be something negative. But dialogues like this, when we say certain things or use certain words, even with our children, to teach them to say that hurts or that offend me when you do that, and to not blow it out. Again, I go back to children and working with my grandbaby and children in certain environments. You're taught those things as a child. But then as you grow up, you're around us, and we have a whole bunch of other stuff going on that begin to contradict that. So the peer pressure of being an adult, you find yourself falling into one category or the other, where those worldviews and perspectives of hatred and bigotry now become a main part of your psyche and what you're taught. I can just call the list of being a black woman in America watching TV, where the black woman was always depicted some type of way, whether it was Esther Rose on the Jefferson, whether it was Ethel, who was like the Esther Rose, who was like the ugliest lady that was Fred Sanford's relative. Then you gave me Florence on the Jeffersons, that was another angry woman, black woman. Now we got Maria, who ain't, even really a woman per se, but you have all of these different depictions of black women. So as a black girl, I don't relate to any of them. I grew up tomboyish. I always had my own style and my own way. So little things like that send messages to young people that then influence how they think, and either helps them to either heal or further promotes their pain. And I think what you said is so key, because as a black person, when you bring up reparations, people say, oh, get over that, forget about that. They don't want you to talk about that. I look at how we celebrate the Holocaust, and I recognize it, but it's very different than African American History Month, which started out as a week. And I could go on to talk about the same thing for those that are of Muslim heritage and so on and so on. So again, I'm going to keep going back to this. It starts with each one of us leveling up to do what we can personally, and then those that we influence. And when you guys get ready to go forward and plan, I have thousands and thousands of young people that I can bring to any setting for dinner or whatever to have these conversations, because the young people will tell us the truth about where they get ideas and perspectives from. And for me, that's my biggest thing that checked me, is when I'm talking to young people and they're watching my behavior, they're watching what I'm saying and how I'm responding to different individuals. I had someone recently post on Twitter that I'm racist. I don't like white kids. I said, yeah, I got a lot of them in my family, but they don't know that about me. And immediately, a white girl that I mentor at Lauderhill 6 through 12 responded. Like Brian said, I didn't have to say anything. So I just think that we have to continue to be models and role models and start with our young people. Many of us have kind of missed it. We can hope that we repent one day and get forgiveness. But we can start now with being better role models for young people.
We're going to take one more question. Thank you so much for that. Just one more, Evan. Thank you.
I do have one question for the panel, and I think, Doctor, you said hopeful when you asked for the impression of the film. So in terms of the future, and the future of our country and the future of our world that we live in, and seeing the dark clouds and a clock reverting not only towards the 60s, but the 50s down to the 30s, what is your outlook in terms of the future of this country, where, I'm going to say something you also said, Doctor, that hatred that you said begins at home, but we hear our politicians spewing such racist and hateful and anti-Semitic tropes. Where are you really hopeful about our future? And this question is for everyone.
Lindsay, I'd love to hear your voice on this one.
I am hopeful for our future. I'm glad you shared that story about Derek Black, because I actually know the boy that invited him to the Shabbat dinner, and I watched him grow up. He's probably one of the smartest individuals that I've known, and I know one of the principles that he lives by and what he was, thinking probably when he invited Derek to that Shabbat dinner, while basically the whole school was shunning him, is a principle I'm sure we're all familiar with, but it's love thy neighbor as yourself. And I think if we all internalize that, and that's something I know you're talking about, like what do you do for internal practice? That's, I study Kabbalah, and, the boy that invited him actually also studies Kabbalah, and I know he learned that there, and I think that it's an important principle that we all take it. It doesn't matter what religion you are, what race, ethnicity, but I think that is, if we can do that, I think the future's in a good place. And, especially, as we talked about, I said I was on this, National Young Leadership Cabinet, but it was this civil rights mission was not something that was, put upon us, but it was something that we all wanted as a group to do. And I think everyone was moved by it, and I think, the young people in this group, we're going forward. So.
Can we give our panelists a round of applause? And I'd like to thank every one of you for being here, for sharing this space. We will make sure that those of you who are interested in moving forward, not just with this dialogue, but with this action, will get access to what we are doing with the panelists. We'll just stay for one moment because we need to take a couple of photographs. Again, I'd like to thank all of the partners, all of the people that worked really diligently to make this and make this an extraordinary evening that is, as you said, the beginning of conversation and work in our community. Thank you and have a beautiful evening.
Yeah,